I'm going to rank them in reverse order, right? So number 5 is the person I least want to have the job, and number 1 would be my preferred candidate. So number 5, Jason Ayto. I've already touched on it. I think he'd be starting from a disadvantage. I think he'd be starting from a position of huge pressure. Some would counter that point and say, yeah, but the fact that he's already at the club, that he's been working at the club for such a long time, what that would do is mean that he doesn't need that settling in and embedding period. That's what the counter argument is. To me, I think it works the other way around. I think the pressure he'd be under from the very beginning makes his job harder. So Jason Ayto's at number 5 for me. Number 4 is Thiago Scuro. I think he would be a great candidate in the eyes of the ownership. And I know ultimately that's what matters. But from a purely footballing standpoint, this is not the guy I want. He feels like a hybrid between a football guy and a business guy. And I would rather the business was done by others and that he moves aside so that we can bring someone in who's got a higher and a greater focus, if you like, on the sporting side of things, rather than someone who dabbles in the business side as well. Because I always think if you spread yourself too thin, you end up doing nothing to the best of your ability. Okay, moving on. I'm going to go. In. Oh, this is tough. In third, I'm going to go Roberto Olabe. That's going to surprise people. I'll explain a little bit about why in a minute. But I look at Roberto Olabe and I look at his history and I look at his track record. And yes, he's unearthed some gems. And yes, he's been responsible for negotiating deals involving some fantastic players, whether those are incomings, outgoings, or both in the cases of some players that he's managed to bring in, they've managed to flip and move them on. Right. So Roberto Olabe, for me, is in third place because I don't think that having that job at a club like Real Sociedad is anything like having that job at a club like Arsenal, where there is a demand to win now, where you're not going to be lauded, at least not by the supporters, for flipping players for big money. Right? There is an expectation that Arsenal are going to go on and win major silverware. And that means you need to get big players and you need to get them in now. Yes, you want to have some building going on in the background so that you can maintain a healthy level of development within your squad. Of course you do. But Roberto Olabe feels like someone who would thrive at a club and has thrived at a club where the expectation level is just a little bit lower and where it's about making the best of what you have rather than it being about having that X factor, right, that I think you need to be able to attract the biggest players in the world. And where I really sort of sided with Edu was that I thought that he had that personality and that character that meant that he could go in a room with anyone and he could convince them that the project was the right one for them. I think Clive Palmer said to me on Thursday last week or something like that. He said, you'd buy a used car from Edu. That's how good of a salesman he feels like. I don't know if Roberto Olabe is that kind of guy. I don't know if he's that kind of guy. So I've got to assume, or I've got to judge this based on what I know right now. And I don't know him to be that sort of character that lights up a room, that guy that could sell you a used car. He looks like a good talent identifier, but the sporting director role at Arsenal is so much more than that. And the role at Sociedad is about bringing in players, getting the team to a certain point, but without there ever really being that expectation of going much higher and really sort of knocking on the door. Like, you could not compare the objectives of Roberto Olabe at Real Sociedad as those of Andrea Berta, who's been, for instance, at Atletico Madrid. The levels are different. And Olabe, I know you need to give people a chance so that they can jump up and can prove themselves. But I think having lost Edu, who was such a key component in this project, I think we need to go with a sure thing now. So Olabe is in third for me. Second, this will surprise people, I'm going Dan Ashworth. I don't think what happened at Manchester United was in any way a reflection of Dan Ashworth and his value as a sporting director. I really don't. I think he's very, very astute. I think he's proven that over time. I think he's shown that he can do big deals. And this is another thing, right? You're going to call me crazy and you're going to start moaning and calling me a conspiracy theorist and all the rest of it. But Dan Ashworth, right? Let's have a look at his career now. So I'm just bringing it up in front of me because I want to make sure that I'm getting my facts right as I kind of reel this off to you. Right. So Dan Ashworth, he has spent time, first of all, sorry, I'm just reading this. Let me just make sure I've got the right thing. There we go. So he retired as a player and he became academy director at Peterborough. Then he went on to become Centre of Excellence director at Cambridge United. Then he moved to West Brom. And then after that, September 2012, this is the key bit, Ashworth was appointed as the FA Director of Elite Development. He's one of the creators of the England DNA and Elite Player Development Plan, which aims to help create winning senior teams in the men and women's games. Of course, later on, he ended up joining Brighton and Hove Albion. That was in the spring of 2019. And in February 2022, it was confirmed that he'd agreed to join Premier League club Newcastle United before, of course, he went to Manchester United and all of that stuff happened, right? But the reason I've gone with Dan Ashworth is because, or part of the reason is because, one of the most experienced people in this country. I think it's important that Arsenal have someone who can improve relations with the FA. I think it's really important. Now, you're going to think that I'm reaching here and you're going to say that I'm talking out of my backside. And maybe I am, but this is just what I think. So humor me, bear with me. Throughout most of this season, we've been complaining about bad decisions, about our people getting charged, about our people being refereed differently, treated differently. And there is a feeling from sort of within the Arsenal fan base that we are being picked on. And I wonder if there's a way that by appointing the right person, someone already has that pre-existing relationship with the FA. I'm not saying that we're going to get any favors. I'm not saying that we should be asking for favors. But would that help? Would that help in terms of ensuring that we are refereed the same as everyone else, that we're charged the same as everyone else, because it feels like we get charged for bloody everything. Everybody else seems to get away with stuff. And funny how charges involving other managers seem to take far longer, even when the manager holds his hands up and says, yes, I was wrong. So it's not the only reason I'd appoint Dan Ashworth. I think Dan Ashworth's got a really good body of work prior to a very short stint at Manchester United, which, as I say, I don't really think is down to him. Dan Ashworth for me seems like a sound candidate. And it's a bit like the kind of Kai Havertz thing, right? Where you look at where he's been, you look at, the time that he spent at sort of Manchester United, albeit a very short period of time, for which I don't hold him responsible for the failure of. And you can all of a sudden go, well, this guy's useless, and dismiss him because of that, when actually you need to look beyond that. You need to scratch beneath the surface, and then you'll see that actually, discount the Man United bit for a second, he's had a very, very good career. And he's someone who I think, could do a good job at Arsenal, understands the big club thing. He's been at a couple of them now. Obviously understands the Premier League and the dynamics of it, because he's got experience of being a sporting director at 1, 2, 3 Premier League clubs. I think there's a lot of positives to Dan Ashworth, but I think because of what happened at United, his name might sound a little bit kind of tarnished, if you like, and I don't think that's fair. So he's my second choice. So far, Ayto is down in 5th for me. In 4th, it's Thiago Scuro. In 3rd, it's Olabe. In 2nd, it's Dan Ashworth, which means that my number 1 is Andrea Berta. He's the one, looking at this list, that I would pick. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that for the last year, I've been banging the drum and saying, we need to go and get Andrea Berta from Atletico Madrid. No. I'm not going to pretend that. He's been at the club for 12 months, and he only left last month. Okay, so this was not a name that was in my mind. This is not a name that I've been sort of peddling for a while. I looked at this list from David Ornstein today. I went through the names. I looked into them a little bit before coming live on here. And the one that jumped out to me was Andrea Berta. Perfect balance between understanding what it takes to keep a club competitive with other clubs who have greater spending power. So Atletico have punched above their weight and have competed with Barcelona and Real Madrid, which they have no right to do. The club has developed over time, new stadium, increased revenues, etc., etc. And obviously that has helped, but that has come as a result of them being very, very good on the pitch. And Andrea Berta has played a big part in that. Okay, so he's got experience of bridging the gap between the clubs that are better resourced and the clubs that are sort of just below that, which I think is kind of where we fall and where we sit. Because whatever you say about our ownership, self-sustaining is what they want. There are a lot of regulations in place. And so we haven't got a blank checkbook that we can just throw about in the way that Manchester City have done, for instance, for the last decade, or in the way that Chelsea did for the best part of 2 decades under Roman Abramovich. So Berta has that experience of sort of bridging the gap between the strong spenders and the biggest of spenders. That's the first thing. Second of all, he's managed to broker really good deals involving big name players, which is the place that we want to be in, right? We don't want to be doing deals for second-rate players. We want to be doing deals for the very best players. They have managed to get players in at Atletico Madrid that I would have argued prior to signing for Atletico Madrid had their pick of clubs, but they chose them. He must have played a part in that. I'm sure Diego Simeone does too. I think there are a lot of similarities between Diego Simeone and Mikel Arteta, not in terms of their success as a coach so far, because I know that's what the critics are going to tell me in the comments. Simeone's up here, Arteta's not there yet. That's the truth of it. But in the sense of knows what he wants, very strong character, kind of needs to have quite a bit of power to be able to do his job in the right way or to the best of his ability, etc., etc. I just think there's so many similarities between our situation and the situation that Atletico have been in for such a long time. And so I think the one that would slot in nicely is Andrea Berta.